Since 9/11, many people in the Western world started paying more attention to the Middle East, but unfortunately, most of that attention was negative. Over the years since, stereotypes and misconceptions have built up about the Middle East, and many people now have a very confused and rather narrow view of a very large and diverse region. In today's video, we're going to go over 10 ways that people misunderstand the Middle East. Number 10. The Middle East has more religious diversity than most people realize. Now, it's really hard to get into the exact numbers because what the Middle East is can be kind of ill-defined to begin with, and there are distinct regions within the Middle East as well. However, while the majority of the population in what most people would consider the Middle East is Muslim, that doesn't mean there isn't a lot more religious diversity than most people think. Due to hearing about groups like ISIS or the Taliban, many in the Western world are under the impression that religious minorities either hardly exist, have gone entirely to ground, or that those who do exist are just another form of Muslim. Now, while groups like ISIS are not exactly tolerant of religious minorities, the vast majority of countries in the Middle East are pretty tolerant when it comes to other religions. They may make state laws you have to follow based on their religious values, but they are usually okay with you practicing your own views. And for those who have heard of a Christian minority in the Middle East, they are far from the only other religion. There are many older religions in the area as well. Also, while the majority of the Middle East is Muslim, that does not mean the majority of Muslims live in the Middle East. That would only be about 20% of them. Number 9. Despite most people thinking of it as a desert, some of the Middle East actually gets snow. Most people tend to think of the Middle East as nothing but a desert as far as the eye can see, and many would hardly imagine that they would get snow. But that all depends on what part of the Middle East you're talking about. Depending on where you are within the region, snow may actually be relatively common, or it might be a rarity, but still not unheard of. Countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Iran, Israel, and Turkey get snow pretty much every year, especially in the mountainous areas. Even the UAE, although it usually only gets a little snow on the mountains near its borders, got a pretty decent amount of snow a couple of years back, blanketing the area and delighting locals. In Iran, a freak snowstorm a couple of years back was so bad that it covered cars in huge drifts of snow and snarled up traffic for hours and hours, forcing many to rely on emergency government shelters to stay warm as their cars were running out of gas and the traffic on the roadways was stalled. When it comes down to it, the Middle East is quite a big region with enough climate diversity for a lot of different types of weather. It just depends where in the Middle East you're talking about. Number 8. Covering your head is not always a legal requirement for women. Many people think of the Middle East as one of the worst places that a woman could possibly live, and while some countries certainly are less progressive than others, there are plenty of Middle Eastern countries with laws that are friendly towards women, and in many cases, the stricter control of women is more cultural than it is actual government enforcement. For example, Saudi Arabia is the only country that won't allow women to drive, and it recently even started relaxing those laws. As for the head covering, the issue is a bit more complicated. Not all Middle Eastern countries have a law on the books making a woman cover her head, even if she is a Muslim. However, if a woman is part of a Muslim family who does believe traditionally in the woman covering their head, then she is likely to find very extreme social pressure to do so, and likely wouldn't even see a reason not to, as she would have grown up around it. Number 7. What is considered the Middle East can actually be quite confusing. One of the most confusing things for many is what actually is the Middle East. Some people include more countries further east, and some include more countries further south into Africa. This is complicated more by the fact that the designation was Eurocentric to begin with, and some maps will actually include different countries than others when talking about what is the Middle East. Now, most maps do accept that Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Palestine, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen are a part of the Middle East. However, some maps also include Turkey due to its ties to Middle Eastern culture, as well as several North African countries for similar reasons, and they might also expand the region to include Morocco, Algeria, Libya, and Tunisia. More recently, many of the stands like Afghanistan and Turkmenistan have also been included by many, even though before 9/11 most maps considered Pakistan and Afghanistan as part of Southeast Asia. Further, although very few maps would consider them for geographical reasons, some people even include Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and even Sudan as part of the Middle East because of their cultural ties. Number 6. Surprising to some, English is quite common in the Middle East. While many people tend to think that Middle Easterners don't speak a lot of English, the opposite is actually true. English is the second most spoken language in the world, and a lot of business is conducted in English, so a lot of people learn it simply because it's useful. But more to the point, in the Gulf states especially, English is starting to become more popular than Arabic. Some recent UNESCO figures show literacy rates in the Gulf states as being very close to 100%, but more and more often these children are not learning to read and write in Arabic, but rather in English. Especially in places like the UAE and other oil-rich nations, many families are actually speaking English at home, and it is more common to do this if you are richer. They are also trying to push their kids to be taught English at school more, and this is leading to many young people growing up at very good schools but still not having a good grasp of their ancestral language, which isn't a good thing. The whole thing is likely a side effect of wealth, as the families that manage to make more money likely do a lot of international business and spend a lot of time talking in English. In that respect, it becomes both a status symbol and a tool for achieving success that they want to pass on to their children. Number 5. Poetry is extremely popular, especially in the UAE, where they hold yearly contests. In the Western world today, except perhaps as a rap lyric, most people would consider men reciting poetry to be rather strange or even effeminate, and even among women, poetry just isn't really that much of a thing anymore. However, in the Middle East, especially in the Gulf states, poetry is extremely popular, and men take part as well without any shame or worrying of looking bad in some way. In fact, poetry is so popular in the region that in 2007 a competition was launched in Abu Dhabi, the capital of the UAE, and it now runs yearly, called the Prince of Poets. Thousands of people who have mastered Arabic send their own compositions in order to achieve the coveted title. It's also not unusual to see poetry competitions, sometimes even hosted by a government themselves. Saudi Arabia hosted a competition a couple of years back that allowed all the Gulf states to compete. The prize for the winner? $53,000. The composition was supposed to be patriotic and be about the bravery of the troops who secured the southern border of the Saudi kingdom. They received 650 submissions, 450 of which they deemed to be within the guidelines of the competition. Today, in most of the Western world, we simply don't really do poetry without at least mixing in a bit of music with it. But in the Middle East, it is still a popular and well-honed art form. Number 4. The Middle East may be against most drugs, but hookahs are popular to relax. Most people think of the Middle East as an entirely dry region when it comes to drugs. Many countries are known for not drinking, not smoking marijuana, and some even disallow cigarettes. However, in many parts of the Middle East, especially in the UAE, they have their own poison of choice that seems, if anything, to be increasing in popularity. Smoking shisha tobacco from a hookah, a type of water pipe, is considered by many to be relatively healthy, but it's really not. Research done in the UAE due to concerns over hookah use has shown that an hour session with a hookah can be as bad as smoking 150 cigarettes. Now, some people may consider these numbers to be sensational, but remember, we're talking about drawing smoke off it for an entire hour. Regardless whether it's entirely accurate, the point is that it is much worse for you than cigarettes, and it's terrible for your health. Unfortunately, it's such a big thing culturally, and it's so addictive that it's increasing in popularity, especially among the youth. While the Middle East tends to be quite strict on drugs, they don't seem particularly interested in cracking down on shisha use, even among the young, perhaps because the lawmakers in the UAE can't put the pipe down themselves. Number 3. The average Middle Easterner has no particular animosity for Western society. Many people are convinced that most Middle Easterners, especially those who are followers of Islam, hate the West and all it stands for. However, that really isn't true at all. In fact, the general view of most people living in the Middle East is quite complicated, and they often have a love-hate relationship with how they feel about the West, and especially how they feel about America. They do like certain things about America's personal freedoms and the aspiration to achieve greater things in life. There are ideals about the individual and your own path in life that many find quite interesting. However, many also feel that the West, especially the United States, cannot necessarily be entirely trusted. This isn't hatred or meant to be insulting, it's just people who have been burned a few too many times, and they're struggling to find a reason to put faith in a country whose actions they feel are inconsistent. Many people living in the Middle East feel the way the United States seems to prop up certain dictators and knock others down depending on when it is convenient suggests they are really only in it for the oil and other riches. This shouldn't be interpreted as hatred or anti-West sentiment, as they do appreciate some of our values. They just aren't sure whether they can believe that we want to be friends. Number 2. Men in the Middle East are used to touching, but it doesn't mean they're gay. In many countries in the Middle East, such as Lebanon, Egypt, and Afghanistan, that most people in the United States or many European countries would immediately assume made them gay. In fact, in Egypt, for example, you may see two grown men or even two male soldiers holding hands and walking down the street as if it were the most normal thing in the world. To those two men, it is normal, and they're entirely straight. The reason for this is sort of due to repression, but not exactly repression of homosexuality. Rather, many of these countries have strict laws regarding not being allowed to touch human females unless you marry them, and humans in general really don't do well if they don't get any human contact. For this reason, many men in Middle Eastern countries will touch another man's knee or even hug or kiss him, and it is not considered homosexual behavior. This does not mean there aren't any countries in the Middle East where you can get away with being gay in any respect, but seeing two men holding hands in a Middle Eastern country likely doesn't mean what you think it means. Number 1. Iran has a very complicated relationship with homosexuality and transgenderism. Back in the 1980s, Ayatollah Khomeini decreed that a man could be trapped in a woman's body and the other way around. Since then, Iran has seen an incredible amount of gender reassignment surgeries. Iran's own government agencies claimed that the number of surgeries went from 170 to 370 in just 4 short years from 2006 to 2010. However, one doctor interviewed by the BBC made a much more shocking claim. He claimed that personally alone, not including all the other doctors in the country, he did a total of 200 in just 1 year. Now, this may seem like a higher number of trans people than is statistically likely, but that's because most of them aren't really trans, at least before the surgery. You see, being gay in Iran is illegal and sodomy can be punishable by death, but it's okay to get a gender reassignment surgery and then be with the gender that you want to be with, all right and proper with the law. For this reason, many gay people are pushed by their doctors and parents to get the surgery in order to fit in, but those who do get the surgery usually say they regret it. They don't get to live as who they really are, and some flee the country to avoid a surgery they never wanted. To make matters worse, despite having so many trans people and pushing people to get the surgery, all evidence shows that Iran is not any better at accepting trans people than anywhere else. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and do not forget to subscribe. Got brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also, if you're looking for more from me, why not check out my new channel called Highlight History. It's sort of a Today in History thing. You'll find that linked to below. And as always, thank you for watching.